If you've been eating low-carb or keto for weeks and still feel tired, foggy, or stuck, this video is for you. Many people enter ketosis but never fully become fat-adapted, and the reason isn't willpower or genetics. It's a handful of common mistakes that quietly slow the process. Fat adaptation normally takes time, and some early discomfort is expected. But when certain mistakes are present, that transition gets dragged out far longer than it should. In this video, we'll break down the biggest mistakes that delay fat adaptation and explain how to fix them so your energy can finally stabilize.
Mistake 1 is eating too little fat while trying to become fat adapted, and it is one of the most common reasons people feel stuck on keto or low carb. When people reduce carbohydrates, many subconsciously carry over years of low-fat dieting habits. They remove bread, sugar, and starches, but they also keep fat intake low because fat has long been associated with weight gain or poor health. The result is a diet that is low in carbohydrates and low in fat. From a metabolic perspective, this creates a serious problem. The body has no clear primary fuel source. Fat adaptation is not simply about removing carbohydrates. It is about teaching the body to rely on fat as its main energy signal. For that to happen, fat must be consistently available. When fat intake is too low, the body cannot fully shift its metabolic machinery toward fat oxidation. Instead, it remains stuck in a state of energy scarcity, where glucose is limited and fat is not sufficiently supplied to replace it. In this state, the body often increases stress hormones like cortisol to compensate. It may also increase gluconeogenesis, the process of making glucose from protein and amino acids. While this can help maintain blood sugar, it is not an efficient or stable long-term energy solution. The result is often persistent fatigue, hunger, irritability, and poor mental focus. People may assume these symptoms mean keto is not working, when in reality, the body is underfueled. Another issue with low fat intake during adaptation is that fat itself acts as a metabolic signal. Adequate dietary fat tells the body that fat is safe, available, and reliable as a fuel source. This signal supports the upregulation of fat oxidation enzymes, improvements in mitochondrial efficiency, and better ketone production. Without that signal, these adaptations occur more slowly or incompletely. It is also important to distinguish between using body fat and dietary fat during adaptation. While the goal long-term may be to rely more on stored body fat, the body still needs time to learn how to access and burn it efficiently. During this learning phase, dietary fat acts as a bridge. It supplies energy while the metabolic machinery is being rebuilt. Removing that bridge too early can stall the entire process. People who eat too little fat during early fat adaptation often experience prolonged keto flu symptoms, low exercise tolerance, and inconsistent energy throughout the day. These symptoms are not signs of failure or poor discipline. They are signs that the body is not receiving a clear fuel message. Fixing this mistake does not mean overeating or forcing fat beyond hunger. It means allowing fat to play its intended role during adaptation, a primary energy source. This typically leads to more stable energy, reduced cravings, and a smoother transition toward full fat adaptation. In short, fat adaptation cannot happen in a low-energy environment. If carbohydrates are removed, but fat is also restricted, the body remains metabolically confused. Providing adequate fat during the transition allows the body to fully commit to the shift, making adaptation faster, smoother, and far more sustainable.
Mistake 2 is eating too many hidden carbohydrates, and it is one of the most underestimated reasons fat adaptation gets delayed. Many people believe they are eating low-carb or even keto, but their daily carbohydrate intake is still high enough to interfere with consistent fat adaptation.
This usually doesn't come from obvious sources like bread or sugar. Instead, it comes from hidden carbs in foods that seem harmless: sauces, dressings, condiments, flavored yogurts, protein bars, nuts, low-carb packaged foods, and even certain vegetables when eaten in large amounts. Fat adaptation requires metabolic consistency. The body needs a clear, repeated signal that glucose is no longer the primary fuel. When carbohydrates are consumed sporadically throughout the day, even in small amounts, insulin rises just enough to suppress fat breakdown and ketone production. This keeps the body switching back and forth between glucose and fat instead of committing fully to one system. This constant fuel switching creates a metabolic limbo. The body never experiences sustained low insulin long enough to upregulate fat oxidation enzymes or fully adapt mitochondria to fat-based energy. As a result, ketone production may be inconsistent and fat utilization remains inefficient. People often feel unstable energy, cravings, and mental fog, even though they believe they are following the diet correctly. Another issue is psychological rather than physiological. When people allow frequent small carb intakes, the brain remains conditioned to expect glucose. This maintains carb cravings and makes it harder to reduce carb reliance. Instead of decreasing over time, cravings may intensify, reinforcing the belief that keto or low carb isn't sustainable. Hidden carbs are especially problematic during early adaptation because this is the phase when the body is trying to learn a new fuel system. Just like learning a new skill, frequent interruptions slow the process. Every time glucose is reintroduced, the body defaults back to its familiar pathway, delaying the metabolic rewiring needed for fat adaptation. It's also important to understand that low carb is not the same as ketogenic. Some people are eating too many carbs to enter consistent ketosis, but too few to feel good on glucose. This middle ground is where many people get stuck. They experience the downsides of carb restriction without the benefits of fat adaptation. Fixing this mistake does not require perfection, but it does require consistency. Keeping carbohydrate intake low enough for long enough allows insulin to remain suppressed, fat breakdown to increase, and ketone production to stabilize. Over time, the body stops expecting glucose and becomes more efficient at using fat and ketones. Once hidden carbs are removed, many people notice fewer cravings, more stable energy, and clearer mental focus. These improvements are not magic. They are simply the result of removing mixed signals and allowing the body to adapt without interruption. In short, fat adaptation is delayed not by a lack of effort, but by inconsistent fuel messaging. Hidden carbohydrates keep the body tied to glucose, slow metabolic adaptation, and prolong discomfort. Removing them allows the body to fully commit to fat-based energy, making the transition smoother, faster, and far more reliable.
Mistake 3 is ignoring electrolytes, and it is one of the biggest reasons fat adaptation feels harder, longer, and more uncomfortable than it needs to be. When carbohydrate intake is reduced, insulin levels drop. This is a normal and expected part of low-carb and ketogenic diets. However, insulin does more than regulate blood sugar. It also helps the kidneys retain sodium and water. When insulin falls, the body begins excreting more sodium, and water follows. Along with sodium, other electrolytes such as potassium and magnesium are also lost more easily. This rapid loss of electrolytes happens before full fat adaptation is established. As a result, many of the symptoms people attribute to keto flu are not caused by a lack of fat adaptation at all, but by electrolyte imbalance. Fatigue, dizziness, headaches, muscle weakness, heart palpitations, and poor exercise tolerance are classic signs that electrolyte levels are too low. Electrolytes play a critical role in energy production. Sodium is essential for nerve signaling and muscle contraction. Potassium is required for cellular energy balance and heart rhythm. Magnesium is involved in hundreds of enzymatic reactions, including those related to ATP production inside mitochondria. When these minerals are deficient, energy production becomes inefficient, regardless of whether fat or glucose is being used. During early fat adaptation, the body is already under stress as it rewires its metabolic systems. If electrolytes are not adequately replaced, this stress increases. The brain and muscles struggle to function optimally, leading to mental fog, low motivation, and physical weakness. Many people mistakenly interpret these symptoms as proof that keto or low carb doesn't work for them, when the real issue is mineral depletion. Another reason electrolyte neglect delays fat adaptation is that low electrolyte levels increase stress hormones. When the body perceives a threat to fluid balance, it activates cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones can raise blood glucose, increase cravings, and interfere with ketone production. Instead of smoothly transitioning to fat-based energy, the body remains in a reactive, stressed state. Electrolyte imbalance also affects exercise tolerance. People often notice that workouts feel unusually difficult during early keto. While some performance drop is normal during adaptation, severe weakness or dizziness is often a sign of low sodium or potassium, not metabolic failure. This can lead people to overeat carbs to fix their energy, which further delays adaptation. Fixing this mistake is not about supplements alone. It starts with understanding that electrolyte needs increase on low-carb and ketogenic diets. Sodium intake usually needs to be higher than on a standard diet. Potassium and magnesium must also be supported through food or supplementation. When electrolytes are adequate, energy levels improve, symptoms ease, and the adaptation process becomes far more tolerable. Importantly, electrolyte support does not speed fat adaptation by itself, but it removes unnecessary friction. It allows the body to focus on metabolic rewiring instead of constantly correcting fluid and mineral imbalances. In summary, ignoring electrolytes does not mean fat adaptation is failing. It means the environment is not supportive. Proper electrolyte balance reduces fatigue, stabilizes energy, and prevents stress responses that slow progress. When electrolytes are addressed, fat adaptation becomes smoother, safer, and significantly easier to sustain.
Mistake 4 is training too hard too soon, and it is a major reason fat adaptation feels slower and more frustrating than expected. When people start a low-carb or ketogenic diet, many try to maintain the same training intensity they used when running on glucose. High-intensity workouts such as sprinting, heavy lifting, HIIT, or long endurance sessions rely heavily on glycogen and rapid glucose availability. During early fat adaptation, these systems are not yet optimized. Glycogen stores are reduced, and the body has not fully learned how to deliver fat-based energy quickly enough to support that level of demand. This creates a mismatch between energy demand and energy supply. The muscles ask for fast fuel, but glucose is limited and fat delivery is still inefficient. As a result, workouts feel unusually difficult, performance drops sharply, recovery slows, and fatigue accumulates. Many people interpret this as loss of fitness or failure of the diet, when in reality it is a temporary metabolic mismatch. Training too hard during this phase also increases stress hormones, such as cortisol and adrenaline. While these hormones help mobilize energy in the short term, chronically elevated stress hormones interfere with fat adaptation. Cortisol raises blood glucose through gluconeogenesis, encourages the body to cling to glucose as a backup fuel, and can suppress ketone production.
Instead of reinforcing fat-based metabolism, excessive training stress sends the opposite signal that glucose is still urgently needed. Another issue is recovery. Fat adaptation requires cellular remodeling, including changes in mitochondrial function and enzyme expression. Hard training increases inflammation and muscle damage, which diverts energy away from adaptation and toward repair. If recovery demands consistently exceed available energy, the body prioritizes survival over optimization. Fat adaptation slows, not because it is failing, but because the environment is too demanding. This mistake is especially common among people who are highly active or fitness-focused. They assume that pushing harder will force adaptation. In reality, adaptation is not forced through stress. It is enabled through consistent, manageable energy demand. During early fat adaptation, the body benefits more from lower-intensity movement that allows fat oxidation pathways to develop without excessive glucose demand. It is important to note that this does not mean exercise is harmful or should be avoided. Movement is beneficial during adaptation, but the type and intensity matter. Walking, light cycling, Zone 2 cardio, mobility work, and moderate resistance training place manageable demands on the energy system. These activities encourage fat usage without overwhelming a system that is still learning. Over time, as fat adaptation improves, training capacity returns and often surpasses previous levels. Muscles become better at accessing fat, glycogen is conserved more efficiently, and energy delivery stabilizes. At that point, higher intensity training becomes sustainable again. The problem arises only when intensity is pushed before the metabolic foundation is ready. Fixing this mistake does not mean lowering standards or losing progress. It means temporarily adjusting expectations to support long-term success. Reducing training intensity during early fat adaptation lowers stress hormones, preserves recovery capacity, and allows metabolic rewiring to proceed uninterrupted. In short, training too hard too soon does not speed fat adaptation, it delays it. By matching training demands to the current metabolic state, the body is allowed to adapt efficiently. Once adaptation is complete, performance rebounds with greater stability, endurance, and resilience.
Mistake 5 is not giving fat adaptation enough time, and it is the most common reason people quit right before the benefits appear. Many people enter a low-carb or ketogenic diet with the expectation that once ketones show up, fat adaptation should be complete. Ketone strips change color, energy should improve, and everything should feel better within days. When that does not happen, frustration sets in. In reality, this expectation misunderstands how adaptation works. Ketosis and fat adaptation are not the same thing. Ketosis is simply the presence of ketones in the blood. This can occur within a few days of carbohydrate restriction. Fat adaptation, however, is a much deeper process. It involves long-term changes in enzymes, mitochondria, hormone signaling, and fuel preference across tissues. These changes take weeks, not days. The body is conservative by design. It does not abandon a fuel system it has relied on for years or decades overnight. Even after ketones appear, muscles and the brain may still prefer glucose because that pathway is familiar and efficient. Fat oxidation pathways exist, but they are underdeveloped at first. Mitochondria need time to increase their capacity to burn fat and ketones efficiently. Enzymes involved in fat transport and oxidation must be upregulated. This remodeling cannot be rushed. During this transition, energy often feels inconsistent. Some days feel better, others worse. Performance may fluctuate. Hunger and cravings may come and go. Many people interpret this instability as proof that the diet is failing, when it is actually a normal sign of adaptation in progress. The body is testing, adjusting, and recalibrating its energy systems.
Another reason impatience delays fat adaptation is that people often change strategies too quickly. They add carbs back, reduce fat, increase training intensity, or abandon the diet entirely when results are not immediate. Each of these changes resets the adaptation process. Instead of allowing the body to settle into a new metabolic state, it is repeatedly pulled back toward glucose dependence. It is also important to recognize individual variability. Factors such as previous diet, metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, activity level, stress, and sleep all influence how long adaptation takes. For some people, noticeable improvements arrive in 3 to 4 weeks. For others, it may take 6 to 8 weeks or longer. Comparing timelines only increases frustration and leads to premature quitting. Fixing this mistake requires reframing expectations. Fat adaptation is not a quick hack, it is a biological transition. The goal during this period is not peak performance, but metabolic consistency. Keeping carbohydrates consistently low, eating enough fat, supporting electrolytes, managing stress, and adjusting training allows the body to complete the adaptation process without interruption. Once fat adaptation is established, the payoff is significant. Energy becomes more stable throughout the day. Cravings diminish. Mental clarity increases. Physical endurance increases. Most importantly, the constant effort required to manage energy disappears. These benefits often arrive suddenly, after weeks of gradual internal change that went unnoticed. In short, fat adaptation fails most often because people stop too soon. The body is not resisting change, it is completing it on its own timeline. Giving the process enough time is not passive, it is the final and most critical requirement for success.
Fat adaptation doesn't fail because the body can't change. It fails because most people stop before the process is finished. What feels like failure is usually just transition. The body isn't broken, it's rewiring how it produces energy. When you remove mixed signals, support the process, and give it enough time, fat adaptation happens naturally. In the next video, we'll go deeper into the biggest mistakes that slow fat adaptation even further and how to avoid them completely. If you want clear, science-based explanations like this, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next.